This week on the podcast, we are so lucky to have Stasha Washburn joining us. She is the period coach, which is the bloody kind, not the grammar kind, and is the founder of the Period Coaching School. She's also an international speaker, author of The Revolution Will Be Bloody and The Bloody Brilliant Business. She's an inventor of the world's first period oracle card deck, and is a dancer, cook, sword fighter, Tai Chi practicing, skateboarding, INTJ, outdoor loving world traveler. She'll go anywhere as long as there is a tea kettle and some Wi-Fi. She is a certified holistic health coach with 25 plus years of research in her passion to reconnect women to the power of their period. Stasha is leading the bloody revolution to end the taboo of menstruation worldwide. No longer whispers in bathrooms, she's leading powerful public discussions, and she's here on the podcast with us today to teach us all about this bloody revolution and how we can take part. Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. So to say that I'm excited that you're here is kind of an understatement. It was like that whim of like, I found this book. Well, I listened to a podcast. I heard you speak. I was like, this is interesting. I checked out your website. I was like, there's a book. I need this book. And I picked it up literally probably 3 weeks ago. It's been sitting on my desk for maybe about a month. And I picked it up and I was like, where has this book been my whole life? Because I've been doing this work for a while, just like you have. And I know a lot about the cycle clinically and also more of that sacred spiritual connection. Mm-hmm. But there was something about the language and the way you wrote it in this book that there was a missing element that has never been found in any other book. So I'm just going to preface that as we go into this because we're going to dive all into why I found it so profound. At least the first half of the whole book was profound. But the first half was just like, where has this been? These are the answers I've been looking for. And where I often feel lost in coaching my own clients or bringing up these conversations. And you just laid it out in a way that just made sense.
So. Oh, that is exactly what I was going for. So that's great. That's exactly what I want to hear.
So maybe to get started, what brought on, okay, first, I guess, I've been talking about this book, but I didn't give the title at all. So Stasha's book is called The Revolution Will Be Bloody. And trust me, you need to read it. How did this book come into being? Like, what was like this moment where you're like, you know what, I'm going to write a book that is going to challenge a lot of thoughts and really just be honest conversation?
Well, to be fair, I had I don't know, maybe 20 first drafts in a folder over the course of years. And then one day, Tash Corbin, who you may have heard of, she's a business coach out of Australia, but I was talking to her and she was like, you just need to do a Kickstarter. And I thought, you know what, that's a great idea. Because the whole publishing route, which I'd done before, I've written fiction before and fictionalized nonfiction, as I called it back in the day, is a hard road. And so I thought, you know what, that could be a fun way to do it because I'm not beholden to anybody. I can just write exactly what I want to write, say what I actually want to say, no censorship, no publisher, no editor, no nothing. And then I can just do it and put it out. So I did. And then I owed people a book. So I had to write it, which I did. And it was fine because it had been knocking around in my brain for so long that it just sort of poured out and it came out. And then we used the Kickstarter funds to get an editor to, make it coherent and, punctuation and I are not the best of friends. So we fixed all that good stuff. And then the Kickstarter funds helped me actually print it and get it out there in the world. So it was a really independent grassroots effort with everyone that supported the Kickstarter and got on board to help out with its creation and made it happen. So it really felt like a community book. And to this day, it still feels like that. I still, when somebody reads it and sends me an email or asks a question or anything like that, it just reignites that real community feeling behind it.
And I'd probably say that's one thing maybe that I loved a lot about it, is that reading it, it felt like I was reading the words of a conversation with a friend, right?
Yeah.
Like, I love that there wasn't some censorship sometimes, and that it was bold, or that it was cheeky, right? Like there was so much in it that I was just like, this is great. One thing that I really loved about the book, and I had to sit with this over the past few days when you were like, yeah, sure, I'll come on your podcast. I was like, really? What do I want to talk about? But I think when I really sat with the book and what it is, like, why did I love this book so much? And I think it's because, and this is what my little aha moment that I came up with, was that as women, and I think as a society, we hear the words patriarchy, we hear the words ancestral wounds, feminine energy, witch trials, and we hear them. And I think sometimes we think we know what they mean, but we don't really know the felt sense of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And reading your book, and especially in the first part, which I love that you put that as the first part, because it really laid the groundwork for you to go deeper into what you teach, is that we really can't heal as women unless if we can really feel what these words land in our body. Like, how does it feel when we actually think? And to start to acknowledge that this is still happening. Right. And I think that's what blew my mind, is when you wrote that, I was like, because I think that's where I struggle a lot in coaching, is I say these things, but then I can see the glassy eyes or glossy eye look over my clients of just like, And I'm like, either I'm saying something that makes them feel really uncomfortable, or I'm saying something and they're really disconnected from it. And I think it's more of that they're disconnected from it. Because what does it really mean to have the patriarchy affect us? What does it really mean to have the ancestral wounds? Like, is that a real thing, or is that woohoo, right? And your book laid it out in a way that it made me feel that it was so real and tangible. And there was one part in your book that I loved, that you wrote that we need to be able to see what's influencing us and why we react the way we do, or we can never move past our conditioning response.
Yeah.
And that's what that felt like to me.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole goal of the first section of that book was to do a little deprogramming. The fact,
a little?
Yeah, I suppose it is a lot.
Just a little.
But the fact is that we grow up in this, so you can't see it, right? It's too close. It's the whole, you can't see the forest for the trees line, right? You don't see how these little things that just disconnect you. And it's very intentional. It's very culturally intentional. Goodness, you're seeing it in spades right now with all the political stuff happening in the United States. So you can see it playing out in real time now, where we are losing the lives of women because of this cultural conditioning that separates us from our cycles. So I was the same way. I've coached for 15 years or something like that now. And I realized that in our conversations, we were constantly coming back to, okay, but you're feeling like this because that's what the conditioning has told you. And you're shutting down because it's safer. So we really need to get to that place where you can see how things are affecting you, why they're affecting you the way they are, why you're responding the way you are. Otherwise, you can't move on. You can't fix it. You can't heal it. You can't, whatever terminology suits you best, but you can't move forward making any kind of connection when you're in this place where you're so disconnected from your body. And there's no way to separate your cycle from your body. And you can't say, I love myself if you hate your cycle, or if you hide your cycle. There's no way that you can fully embrace yourself if you're ignoring it. It affects everything: sleep, mood, digestion, energy, brain fog. Everything is attached to our menstrual cycle. I always joke that my superpower when I'm doing speaking events is anyone tell me something and I will tell you how it could be done with your cycle in flow. Because everything can be done better in flow, right? That's how I started the whole doing business in flow thing, because I just realized, boy, business is written by men for men. Doesn't really work for me. And it doesn't really work for any of the women that I'm coaching. So what if we all do this and try it and see what happens? And then just seeing success after success after success.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, so we have to deal with the root of this deconditioning, this overlay that separates us, keeps us from embracing our cycles. Instead of running away from it, we really need to turn around and face it. And it's hard work, right? This is why we talk about doing that menstrual ritual, that menstrual work, that just looking at those things and being honest, right? That's it. It's just being honest. It's not, there's no judgment, there's no shame, there's no embarrassment. You go through anger, you go through, all these feelings, very much like the stages of grief, but you can come out the other end. And when you have that powerful asset on your side, you feel whole, complete, powerful in a way that you just cannot do when you're separated from your cycles.
I would 100% agree with that. And I think a lot of the times I hear from women, not always clients, but women, it's just this fear of like, well, how can I talk about this with my partner? How can I really put this in my life? And this was one of my big surprises, is that my husband was not uncomfortable about talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? And this goes back to like how we have, whether we're aware of it or not, have been subconsciously trained that people are going to repel if we talk about it. Now, there's always going to be those people out there, right? Like, we can't avoid them, right? And that's part of their conditioning.
Yep.
But there's other people that really don't care. Like, we talk about it openly in my house with my husband, my kids. Like, my 5-year-old son talks about my period all the time. Like, it's just no big deal. I'm like, I don't know what he's going to share at school today because we've talked about a lot of stuff in the household. But it's okay, right? And he has no shame. And so, like, it's been really interesting. I remember one time even saying to my husband, like, do you feel okay with like me sharing all this all the time? And he was like, well, it's your manual. Like, this is how I understand you now, right? And so like that alone was so reassuring that there was space for me to ebb and flow, right? And for me to be different versions.
Yeah, I've had so many clients who, when talking to them and starting to get to understand their cycle and figure things out, would then start talking to their partners. And it would turn out that their husbands actually knew a lot of it already, like they already knew when they were ovulating or had like an idea of it. They already knew, like they already kind of had the idea. They might not have had the terminology, but they already kind of knew and were working with that cycle where they had just been completely shut off from it. So it was really fascinating to see that. And then at the end of the day, if you have a partner that actually loves you and wants to see you flourish, then they're going to get over any discomfort and have that conversation, right? Like that's just, that's the point of a healthy partnership, is to help each other be the best version of yourselves. And that means having those conversations. So yeah, it's an important one to have. And actually, it was one of the reasons that we did the period oracle card deck, was so that you could have those conversations non-verbally as well as verbally, but you could have the cards, you could stick them up on the refrigerator, you could leave them on the kitchen table, you could use them as visual clues and conversation starters so that you could have those conversations. And you can use it as an oracle deck or a cycle guide, or there's a lot of different uses for it. But my partner is a visual artist. And so he did the visual art for the cards. So we had a lot of conversations about what the cycle is, what this means and that means, and what do we want to feel? And, we spent years making these cards and finally coming to the final draft of them and creating them, because we wanted a way for people to be able to understand themselves, which a lot of people are visual learners. And a way for people to have these conversations, because we were having these conversations. And as a visual artist and myself as a visual learner, it was like, it'd be so much easier if we could have some like visuals.
Yeah.
So yeah, having those conversations, sometimes you need a little extra help. And that was just a way that we could do something together to help people have those conversations easier, or even just with themselves, starting a journal entry with a card and have that kind of exploration with self.
I love it. I didn't even know you had Oracle cards. I'm gonna have to look that up. Amazing. One part of your book that I really loved in the beginning when I was like deeply engulfed and I was like, I can't talk to my kids. I can't feed people. Like I just gotta read. When I was in that moment, you had touched on women in competition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the first time I've seen this written somewhere where I was like, yes, like this, it was an aha moment for so much. And it kind of brings in like the the witch trials and the ancestral wounds and how this is still kind of carrying out and this deeper sisterhood wound as well. Do you want to touch on your theory or this approach of looking at women in competition and how it's related to our cycle and related to our feminine wisdom?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a nuanced conversation because we've all been betrayed, right? Mm-hmm. We've all had that moment. I distinctly remember at the age of 8, realizing I had been used by another woman to get back at her best friend, right? At the age of 8, like I just distinctly remember going, what is this feeling? This is not good. I don't like this. Yep. And it really set me up to be suspicious for the rest of my time, right? Until I started learning more about this stuff and looking into it. And that's kind of where I realized there is a leap of faith one has to make where, eventually do have to trust people and come into that community space, but you have to make sure that they're on the same page. So there's a lot of those same conversations that you have, cycle-based conversations with a partner. It's those same conversations that you end up having with your friends, and then having those conversations about what had happened in the past and what came through. And it's only a boon to that patriarchal overview, right? So we're talking about the patriarchy in terms of it benefits wealthy white men, essentially. It's set up to make sure that wealthy white men continue to be wealthy white men at the benefit and expense of everyone else. So not to say that there can't be great masculine leaders and templates of that, but ultimately the patriarchy is the culture that we live in, and it is set up to keep women in their place. And the easiest way to do that is to keep women fighting each other. Again, just like we're seeing in politics, where it's easy to get, immigrants to fight the other immigrants, or poor people to blame immigrants for loss of their job rather than outsourcing, or billionaires just jacking up profits. So you see it layer after layer after layer, example after example after example. And the easiest way to keep women in their place is to keep them fighting each other for one seat at a table, when in reality, that table has many seats at it. And we could have many seats at that table. Rather than fighting each other for one, we should be helping each other populate that seat. Just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, I'll feel that we've reached equality when the Supreme Court is all women, because it's been all men this whole time. So to truly be equal, we need it to be all women for a length of time to make that balance. So it was it was one of those things where, reading that quote made me kind of rethink things and see things differently. And it's all those little bits and pieces that you sort of put together over a lifetime and just realize, okay, this is really intentionally done so that it is harder for us to achieve. So it is harder for us to succeed and to flourish. And we know there have been studies, and it has been shown that when you put money into the community, to the men in the community, that they use it to enrich themselves and not to benefit the community. And that when you give that money to the women in the community thrives, it flourishes better. In fact, the childhood rates of life increase, right? The child mortality rate goes down, all that good stuff. So we know for a fact that if more women were making more money, if more women were supporting each other and helping each other, that we, for a fact, our culture would do better. It would thrive better. Our economy would be better. Our healthcare would be better. Everything across the board would be better. But that takes away from those few rich white men. So that's, not what they want. So it really is something where I feel like as women, if we just sort of opt out of the patriarchy, it's like you don't have to rage against the machine necessarily, though there is absolutely the time and the place for that. But in everyday life, those little things that you can do to help, to support, to cheer, commenting on your friend's business just to help boost their post, or sharing, or just those little tiny things, but they make a huge difference when you have the culmination of it. And that's where I think, like, I'm nothing if not practical. Theory is divine, but if it's not something useful, then it's not useful. I want something that I can use, that I can do, that I can take action on, that can be practical. I look at the menstrual cycle very practically. I look at how useful it really truly is. And this is one of those things where it's like, yes, you can make grand gestures, you can protest. And I have 100% marched my entire life in major political moments throughout the years. But it's the everyday actions. Yeah. Those are what really make the long-term difference. Those are what helps buoy each other and help each other feel good, and we all have bad days. We all have like, oh gosh, I can't believe this is happening days. But when we have our friends, when we have the girls, when we have those conversations in those spaces, we can make it through and we can keep going instead of quitting or being reduced or made small. And that's really ultimately, right? That's like the whole weight loss thing. It's just, if you're too focused on counting calories, then you won't be focused on counting ballots or, running for school board, or you won't be working towards a better environment if you're too busy worrying about your calories and weight loss. It's that whole cycle of just keeping women small and distracted so that they can't actually do what they can and capable of doing, which obviously it wouldn't be so discouraged if it wasn't powerful, right? Like, to me, the separation of menstrual cycle, like, so powerfully enacted, right? The witch hunts going after women, going after midwives, especially herbalists, people who had health knowledge for women. I mean, it was done very intentionally because they knew how much power that was.
Yeah.
Why else? Why else would you spend hundreds of years, money and manpower to do that if you didn't acknowledge what a threat a powerful, fully embodied woman was?
Yep. I totally agree. And I think this plays into this idea of this law of scarcity, right? Like, that we're going to run out of things. We're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of resources. We're going to run out of job positions. We're going to run out of praise, right? And so we just keep pushing. And when I think about women in competition, I often talk about it as the sisterhood wound. And I always think back to decades ago when I was working in the corporate world, and how often you would see another woman that you worked with and she was cranky or she snapped at you, and right away the defenses went up and it's like, she's my enemy and like, I've got to fight the fight. Where instead, like, knowing what I know now, it's like, I really wish I would have been that person that would have been like, can I take something off your plate? Can I give you a piece of chocolate?
Yeah.
Can I close your door and tell everyone to leave you the hell alone? Because you're probably in your late luteal and you have things that you want to complete and people keep disrupting you. And I get it, right? Like, knowing now what I know about my own body, I was like, I could have dealt with conflict so differently, which leads into another part of your book. And this is the first time I've ever heard about this, about the stress response, and how for women, that is very different than men. And this was like a profound moment reading your book where I was like, this makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, WTF.
Yeah. I often wonder if it was an unintended consequence or if it was an observed consequence, like, knowing that women do better when they have a community of women. Like, was that part of the plan, or was that just kind of like a patriarchal perk?
Yep.
Something they realized after the fact, that isolating women actually deteriorated their mental, emotional, and physical health.
Quick question. Have you ever felt like you're spinning 17 plates in the air, barely holding it together, and still trying to squeeze in some self-care? Yeah, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and a ton of burnout to go with it. But here's the thing, it does not have to be this way. I want to invite you to my free 3-part Burnout to Balance webinar series. In this series, we're diving into the wild, wonderful world of hormones, cycles, and how these rhythms can be the answer to the balance you've been craving. Over 3 powerful sessions, we're unpacking how burnout might actually be your body's cry for deeper alignment, how each phase of your cycle can give you serious superpowers, and the exact hormone hacks to turn chaos into calm. You'll learn how to leverage your natural rhythms, kick burnout to the curb, and finally find a way to get off that endless hamster wheel. So if you're ready to stop feeling like a rundown, overcommitted version of yourself and start living in sync with your body's wisdom, head to the link in the show notes to register. Join me in Burnout to Balance, and let's turn things around together. So do you want to talk about how stress response is different in women and men?
Yeah. I mean, so we all do have flight, fight, freeze, fawn, those stress responses. But there was a study done that took women doing this, of course, that they realized that the fight or flight response study that had been done that had women in it was the women's responses were written off because they weren't within the men's responses. They were different. So rather than saying, oh, well, women seem to have a different response, we should look into that. They just went, well, they're menstrual. They have menstrual cycles. It makes them crazy and unpredictable and weird. So we're just going to write that off and ignore them. So then a couple of women realized what had happened in that study and then went back and went, oh, well, then let's study the women and see what happened. And it turned out that women actually have a tend and befriend stress response. So when there's a stressful situation, women were much more inclined to reach out to a friend, to take care of each other, to help out, that when we still see that in our communities today, right? We see the bringing the casseroles over when someone's sick or just had a baby or, got married or a funeral or whatever, those good and bad stressful events in our lives. But we don't really do it in a conscious way. And it doesn't happen all that often. It happens in certain communities here and there, but it's not always something that happens around the world or even in just the United States. So it was really quite fascinating to see that when women had a great community of women, their stress levels were reduced because they had the other women to talk to learn from, to share, to vent, just get it out, to have camaraderie, that kind of feeling. And they had the support. So it was much easier to shoulder the burden of the good and the bad. And then that was more of that stress response. I've definitely wondered if that had to do with, just evolving and women realizing that they were stronger together. And that if they were going to defeat a common enemy, be it, saber-toothed tiger or neighboring pillaging village, that they were better together as a team. Whereas, we often think of men going out and just sort of one-on-one combating. So it definitely, I don't know if that's true or not. It's just kind of one of those things that I think, back in the day, that was a lot of the theories on why women had heavier fat reserves in the hips and midsection were because they probably spent time in water to escape land predators. Mm-hmm. And whereas, potentially the men would go out and fight those things and the women would take the children out and to wade into water. So it's a theory. I don't know if it's true or if maybe anyone's debunked it between now and when I wrote that book, but it's definitely interesting to think about, how it could have evolved that way. But at the end of the day, tend and befriend. So when we're stressed out, kind of looking at what your reaction is, I think is really telling. Do you have someone that you call when something good or bad happens? Do you have someone you shoot a text to when you need a little word of encouragement, or you're having a bad day, or you're having a great day and you want to share a celebration with somebody? If you don't, it's time to start looking for a community, because it's one of those great things that you can do to lower your stress results and your cortisol levels, which actually helps you improve your menstrual cycle health, as our cortisol often is made by stealing from our progesterone. So if we're stressed out, a lot of our body has a master hormone. It makes a lot of other hormones based on what it needs in that moment. If you're stressed out, it's going to make your stress hormones rather than your reproductive hormones, right? Because those are not important in a stressful moment. So if you want to, less PMS, which 90% of us have some level of PMS, one of the best things you can do is reduce your stress levels. And one of the easiest things to reduce your stress levels is to hang out with the girls.
And to me, this was like the aha that kicked in, because that's really, I'd say that's where my focus has been going, because I'm in my 40s now, perimenopause. It's kicking my ass sometimes.
Same.
A little stressed sometimes, just a little, with 3 kids and running a business and trying to be all the things. And so a lot of my work is looking at where are we stress sensitive in our cycle, and what can we do to help remedy that? How can we use our cycle as our superpower so that we're not burnt out, we're not overwhelmed? And it always comes back to the fact that the modern woman these days has no support system.
Yep.
Like, my mother is 3 hours away. I can't call her to say, I'm bleeding, can you take these kids? Before I might do something that I regret. Just joking. My kids are very safe. But, even like the friend community, like you try to reach out to friends, and I work from home, so I have a luxury, but a lot of them work in offices or they have a 9 to 5. And so then it's like, when you really need that help, they're not like, you feel like there's a lack of community. You feel like you are swimming upstream all by yourself. And when I read this, it made so much sense, because as women, we lack sisterhood. We lack community. We lack shared resources, right? There is this sense within us that we have to somehow, we'll get a special badge if we do it all on our own and declare that we've done it on our own. And I don't know, in my 40s, I'm like, I don't want to do it on my own anymore. There's something so beautiful about being in your 40s. I know that you're a little bit more stress sensitive, but there's also a big, like, I don't really give an F anymore about this, and a readjusting your expectations. And I think, like, when I read that, I was like, yes, this is the remedy in many ways. This isn't about necessarily eating different. Well, all that helps. But what I'm saying is like, if we want to address stress, where are your friends? Where is your community? Are you isolated because of your environment, because of your family life? And why do we as women feel like we have to be everything to the people in our home and that we can never leave? Like, I am so guilty of this. My husband goes and plays basketball every Tuesday. And I feel guilty once a month when I'm like, can I go for supper with the girlfriends?
Yeah.
Like, does he feel guilty when he puts his basketball shorts on and leaves the house at bedtime? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's very much by design, right? I mean, again, it's a little bit like that that we're seeing more and more in the country, where people are going, the fact that we don't get vacation, the fact that we don't have health care keeps us tied to a job that won't let us have any time off. It means we can't protest. It means we can't better ourselves. That means we can't go find a better job. It means we can't have time with our friends. All of those things keep us very much in our place and prevents us from furthering any progressive goals or agendas that we would like to have. And the reality of the situation is that having that time with our friends is the easiest and frankly the most fun way to have stress reduction. Like you can eat all the kale in the world, but wouldn't it be just more fun to hang out with the ladies for an evening? And I say this as an introvert who lives on a mountaintop that, but we have tea almost once a week with the ladies who live up here on these mountains as well. And we all get together, we go to a different house, we host tea, we hang out, we bring extras. I grew a ton of mint. Does anyone want some? Oh, I have a ton of fresh sage. We have little exchanges. We, just those things. One of our friends was going through a chronic illness recently. And so when my other friends messaged me and was like, hey, I want to make her this thing, but I'm not quite sure what the best way to do it is. What do you think? And so we brainstormed the best way to do it so that it would be something effective for her. Like having that sense of community really makes a difference. And I think I tested in something like the 90th percentile for introvert. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Love it. So this all kind of brings us back into the book, into the second half. We spent a lot of time talking about the first because I was like, whoa. But the second half really goes into how we can apply it. Like now that we can feel this, now that we can remember this in our body, now that we are starting to question why we're conditioned the way we're conditioned, we can start to look at our menstrual cycle and what we can do about it, right? Yeah. And so you talk all about your sensual system. Do you want to talk a little bit about what this is, how it applies to the menstrual cycle, and why every woman needs to know this?
Yeah. So I think it's one of those introvert gifts where you really are sensitive to things. Yep. And then coupling that with having endometriosis, where it was just extreme pain every month for a couple of decades, I really realized how every little thing would either increase or decrease my pain. So in a way, that intense pain was a guide. This is not working. Don't do this. Oh, do more. That's good. Do that. Right. So the deeper I got into it, the more sensitive and the more I realized that literally all 6 senses are either helping or hurting your hormonal balance. And, balance is kind of a tough word because it's not like you achieve stasis and then you're done. It's always an ebb and a flow. And then each decade has a different balance and you kind of got to recalibrate. And then of course you go into your 40s and perimenopause and it's like recalibrating every day, maybe sometimes every hour. So it's a constant state of being extremely present, right? It's like extreme presentness. But once I figured out how much food affected the cycle, and I think a lot of us are realizing that now, but this 15 years ago, gluten-free it was like a weird thing that maybe 1 or 2 people did, right? But then I realized, wow, I really can't eat that. That makes a significant impact on how painful my periods are. So it was like, okay, well, I guess I just don't eat bread or pasta or anything anymore. I just sort of had to let it go because there's no gluten-free substitutes. You go to the Asian places and get rice noodles and that was that. So it was a really tough transition to make, but it was worthwhile, right? Because that pain level came down. But then once I realized that, I also realized, okay, but if I add more of these things in, then that reduces the pain level. But then I also realized, oh, but that smell is irritating me and it's making my pain worse. I wonder if smell could affect my pain levels in our menstrual cycle. And then I started paying attention to what smells were in each phase. And then I started paying attention to touch, what felt good, what felt bad in each phase of the cycle. And so it just sort of built around this okay, well, if taste, food, smell, and then sight has always been a big one. Like a dark, cold room around my period, can't deal with the lights, would instantly increase into a migraine. Like sight has always been one. I always have sunglasses with me, and then I always have pink glasses with me. So like the in-between shade.
Yep.
It's like, okay, so sight is affected. Then all of the senses probably have some effect. And that's where I had looked into Chinese medicine and I had looked into Ayurveda in my early 20s trying to deal with endometriosis. But once I figured out the like the gluten thing was a big no-no for me, and caffeine was a big no-no for me, and reducing the sugar made a big difference. Then those other things started to make an impact that I could notice, where beforehand there was no noticing anything because it was just terrible. So it was just like, okay. So I went back and I redid everything from this new perspective. And that's where it really went, oh gosh, this aligns perfectly with the Chinese 5 elements. I know that we only have, 4 phases of the cycle, but there's really more like 5 hormonal shifts. And if you're really feeling your cycle, you can feel 5 distinct differences. So maybe we really need to have those 5, because there's 5 elements in Chinese medicine. There's 5 seasons in Chinese medicine. There's a lot more to it. And that sort of made me open up that idea of really there's more like 5 phases to the cycle, at least, again, practically in everyday life, tangibly, that's what it feels like to be a cyclical person. So why are we not just embracing the reality of the situation? So yeah, it really helped me pull that all together, and then turning it into a little course called Flow Freedom that people can start using to heal, bridge the gap. I mean, for a lot of people, they use that course, that second section in the book, to just start feeling it for the first time, to start making those connections. And it really is, it's like watching someone have their nerve endings reattach for the first time. I know that's what it felt like for me. And I've seen that with my clients, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this for the first time. This is incredible. And it's like you're feeling a phantom limb, but it's actually there. It's not gone. It was just the nerve was severed, and we're regrowing that nerve through this observation, this cyclical observation. It was just so amazing to feel. And it was so amazing to watch in my clients. And that was really where I went, this is where we start. Yeah. This is where now in period coaching school, every student does Flow Freedom. It's part of period coaching school, because even when they're not menstruating, even our postmenopausal or non-cycling students do it with the moon cycle, because it's regrowing that mind-body connection. And that's so important to being a good coach, but also just, feeling that power in your body again, and really getting your own power back. So it was fun to put together. It was a lot of experimentation and trial and error and research, and looking at a lot of old cultures and seeing how they overlapped in the same places, and going, well, look, if all of these 3,000-year-old systems agree, then who am I to say that doesn't make sense? That makes total sense. So, and then practicing it and, asking my clients in those early days, are you ready to do an experiment with me? Let's try this.
Yeah. And, there's something like, for me, I think that was what was the awakening when I was learning about the menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. I was learning about it because I was going through fertility issues, and I was told that it was impossible to heal my body. Like, it was just better to remove body parts and just forge forward. Right. And I remember in that moment being like, there's got to be something better, right? There's got to be an answer besides, let me just cut you open. Right. And so I went on this journey. I had no experience whatsoever with any kind of alternative healing. And I was going to see energy healers and Reiki practitioners. And I did everything. And what it taught me was to tap into this mind-body connection. And then when I started learning about the cycle, I remember this moment. It was so clear. I forgot that my driver's license had expired because no one looks at that date. And then when I realized, I was like, crap. So I had gone in a year later. It's already been expired for a year. And they made me do an eye test. Well, I was at the beginning of my bleed. And I remember them making me do the eye exam for my driver's test. And I was like, I am struggling with my sight. What is going on? Because I do not wear glasses. I've always had 20/20 vision. Like, immediately after that, I booked an eye appointment because I was like, that was hard. And I went for my eye appointment, perfect vision. Mm-hmm. Different phase of the cycle. It was my first big aha of going, wait a minute. I was bleeding and my vision decreased drastically, which then, of course, like, everything happens so serendipity sometimes, but I went to see the dentist, and I hate going to the dentist because I feel like I'm being lectured all the time. Mm-hmm. And they were like, your gums are bleeding a lot. Like, are you flossing every day? Blah, blah, blah. once again, realized I'm in my luteal phase close to my period. There's more blood flow, like everything in my body. So all these things, when I go to people and they make me feel bad about my body or bad about my health, I now time it.
Yeah.
I don't see any health practitioners in the second half of my cycle because I'm just like, I can't handle it. I can't handle it mentally, emotionally. I know that these things are going to look bad, and I just rather go in the first half of my cycle. But it was so empowering to know, like, there's this innate wisdom in us.
Yeah.
And when we get to tap it, we get to decode who we really are or what our real needs are. And the potential for healing is outstanding. I went on to have 3 babies without any medical intervention when I was told I would never have children, right? And so you had endometriosis and you found a way to manage your pain. And I think like we all have this thing that gets us curious about our period at some point. But then when we start to go on the dive and we start to remove ourselves from, I'm going to call it quote unquote conventional medicine or the medical lens, which a lot of that has been developed by men. These books have been wrote by men, right? So they're not taking account of our bodies or our experience. Is that when we actually start to search out what's working for us, we heal ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's the medicine. And it all comes back to knowing our cycle. My other profound thing, and this is saved, I think, my marriage, my parenting, luteal phase, the sound sensitivity. Oh my God. I can hear everyone chewing their food at supper and I feel like I'm going to go crazy. So I now know that for my mental health, I have to eat in a different room. Yeah. I go and eat by myself. And this way, my kids and my husband, they can be silly, they can have fun, they can joke. And I'm not the one that's always yelling at them to just be quiet and eat their food and taste it because they might choke, right? Like now I get to just go and eat quietly and peacefully. But this was also like a learning curve for me of, rather than snapping all the time, of realizing that there was a sense in my body that was trying to communicate with me. And once I tapped into it, I don't eat by myself every meal throughout my whole cycle. I do it for a few days before my period because otherwise it's not enjoyable for anybody.
Yeah, 100%. I remember the first time I told a dentist that I was there and that my gums were likely going to bleed because I was about to get my period. And it was a dentist in Mexico, which bless them, because I swear to God, they're just further advanced than American dentists. But she was just like, yeah, that's what happens. And I was like, okay, amazing, because I've never had a single dentist ever who even knew that was a thing. She goes, oh yes, I'm always having to tell my clients that they don't know, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I just was like, okay, you're my favorite person now.
Yeah. And this is the thing, when we learn about our cycle, it's not about to learn about what is anatomically or physiologically happening in our body. It's about our experience with those exchanges of hormones. Like, what is it providing us? Kind of like back in the day before I knew about the cycle and I was focused on nutrition, it was like, because I was studying Ayurvedic at the time, and it was like, how does food feel in my body? What makes me feel rageful when I eat it? Spicy food. Apparently spicy food and a pitta is not a good thing. So like, these are the things that you learn about, like, what agitates you. And it's not that it's like, well, some might argue you have to cut it out forever, but I'm of the philosophy of that nothing's ever forever. It's that you just know that there's going to be this side effect. So take it with caution. So
that's how I feel about charting, right? Like we did a whole podcast episode about charting versus period tracking, because it was, this whole conversation kept coming up. But when you're charting, you're looking at that kind of thing, right? You're looking at what you're eating and how you feel and the energy level and your mood and all those things. And you're seeing it all on display. And it's like, oh, okay. So now I know that if I have a glass of wine in this phase of my cycle, fine, no big deal. But if I have a glass of wine in this phase of my cycle, I'm not going to sleep and I'm going to be a cranky, groggy mess the next day. And that's also fine. You have an educated decision. So it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go out with the girls. I'm going to have a glass of wine that night. I'll just make sure that I don't have anything the next day. Like, I can do some busy spreadsheet work in the business. I'm not going to do an interview. I'm not going to do a call. I'll make sure that my next day has nap time scheduled. Like you can make the eat in a different room. Like you can make the adjustments so that you can have a life and enjoy it, but also so that you can know what the consequences, be them good or bad, are of that action. And it could be a good thing, right? It could be like, oh yeah, I might have a glass of wine, but if I'm doing it out with the girls, I feel renewed and refreshed the next day. Whereas if I have a glass of wine at home and alone, I feel a little cranky and groggy the next day. Like all of these little bits and pieces, when you're charting, you learn, you see, and then you're able to make a really informed decision based on your unique body and your unique needs. It's not going to be the same for everybody. So it's one of the things I love about charting. It just, the body awareness, the emotional awareness, that connection, again, it brings that connection deeper and more clear. And it's just, it's like a form of magic. I mean, it's very obvious and logical, and but it also feels a bit like magic because you're like, oh my gosh, look at all this amazing knowledge here.
Well, and I think there's so many different ways to chart these days that it really is a creative expression, which that creative nature is really our feminine energy, right? That's like an aspect that it's not about analytical. It's not about doing this to solve a problem. This is about us being curious and going on a journey. And you have a beautiful cycle chart. I love your cycle chart that I learned in the book. It's all art-based and it's creative, and it is tapping into a way that makes it so that way it doesn't feel like a routine, right? And you talk about that, the difference between a routine and a ritual. When we really become embodied in something, it becomes a ritual. It doesn't just become this another task that we have to complete. Yeah. So I loved it. I love your approach. I love that you were taking women on this journey of understanding why they might be feeling what they're feeling, like from a deep, deep subconscious level, and then going in, now that we have this awareness, now let's tap into exploring our senses to understand our cycle so that we can reprogram our life, right? For us, right? And start to heal some of these things that, we're carrying and we're going to be probably carrying for a while. And so how can we start to heal that so that we're changing the dialogue for the generations going forward too? So your work is amazing. I love everything. You have, well, actually, before we go into your links, I always like to end these calls with a womb-led tip. And I know there's probably like 1,000 different womb-led tips that you could give. And I'm guessing I'll be nice and juicy. But if you could think of one for our conversation today, what is something that you would like to leave women with as this little bit of like a tidbit? Does this plant a seed in their head?
I think that the most basic thing is to start charting. Whether it's a spreadsheet, my mandala, not an app, something, pen to paper, coloring pencil to paper, whatever works for you. But having that physical manifestation of how you're feeling, how you're being impacted, what's happening, it creates that connection. And it's hard, but leave the judgment at home. Yeah. And I know that's the hard part. I've talked about it with many a client where they were like, well, I didn't want to chart because I had a couple glasses of wine and I didn't want to have to admit it on my chart. It's like, but then you're missing out on what does that mean for you? So rather than judging yourself or, doing it from a place of self-flagellation, right? Like, stop. The world is already beating us up enough. We do not need to beat ourselves up. That's like the last thing we need to be doing. So stop self-flagellating. Just start charting. Note how you're feeling. Note what's going on around you day to day, where you are in your cycle, and start seeing what those little connections are showing you and let them lead you rather than you feeling like you have to be controlling everything all of the time. Let that observation lead you into having a much more free and fun and healthy life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Cycle charting has definitely been a game changer for me. And the days that I don't actually write down, I still check in with myself. It's amazing how I wake up and right away it's like, how do I feel? Did I get enough sleep? Do I feel like I'm awake or alert? What day of my cycle am I on? Like at any given time, I can tell you what day I am on. And I'm constantly throughout the day checking with my body of like, why am I reacting that way? Why do I feel this way? Right? And that's also for the good feelings. It's like, wow, my God, I want to have dance parties and cuddle with my kids. What's going on? Where am I at? Right? Like, what day am I on? Fun mom is here.
For real, if I could get every man, woman, child just across the board to start charting, I feel like the level of self-awareness would just skyrocket. And then everything, because your interpersonal relationships are only going to be better with more self-awareness. Yep. I just feel like
if you know what to ask for.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I really look, I focus on women because frankly, that's who I want to help and support and uplift. But if I could get men to chart too, it would be amazing. And just think of how improved the world would be if everyone was just paying attention. You know, it takes 2 minutes a day, but the benefits are all the time, every minute of every single day. If there's no ROI, there's no return on interest that's better than charting. If I could get everyone to do it, I would.
I love it. I love it. Now, all of your links are going to be in the show notes below. So if anyone's like, how do I reach out? How do I find out more? How do I get a hold of these courses? They are all going to be in the show notes. But do you want to quickly announce a few things? Like there's your chart. What other things do you have going on that you want to share with us?
Yeah, the chart is free forever. It's like I said, I believe in charting so fully that you could never give me a dime ever. And you could use this chart for the rest of your life for free. Like that's how deeply I believe in it. Though there is a charting book for those of us who like to have everything in a spiral bound, organized way. It's on the...
I might be getting that.
Scroll down if you want on the freebie page. There's the books that are on there if you want to jump in at that level. I love them. Each book has the year on it and I have a whole stack of them. So it's just so easy to go back and look at the years. But yeah, so that's good. Period Coaching School is where most people go these days, whether they just want to learn for themselves or they want to add it to an already existing business or they want to start a new business doing anything menstrually related. But if you work with women, Period Coaching School is a great way to learn. We talk about, of course, the menstrual cycle, but also business back end. I was a business coach for a long time. I've business coached thousands upon thousands of people. So that's kind of just the fun nerd in me, loves doing that. And of course, coaching and that kind of stuff. So it's a fun place to learn and explore and grow. And then, we have the new book coming out. So The Revolution is out already. Obviously, you can grab that. And then the new book will be coming out. We're actually in the process of typesetting for all the book nerds out there. It's where we go, oh, we should put this here and the quote should look like this. And this is the font we should use. So we're in the typesetting mode currently. We have a book cover to do, and then it'll be out there in the world. So we're hoping by the end of the year at the latest, it will be out in the world.
Wow. My birthday is December 30th. So that might be a birthday present to myself.
Ooh, I like it. It, again, is very, very practical. Like this book is called Brilliant Bloody Business, and it is very much just practical. Like these are the things that we need to do in business, and then this is how we do them with our cycle. Step by step, laid out, and a lot of the spreadsheets and templates and stuff that we have in the school for the school students. I'm giving access to the people who buy the book for the bonus page. And of course, the school students have lots of extras as well. But yeah, it's obscenely practical. If The Revolution was a practical book, this one is going to be even more so. I expect to see lots of dog ears and pencils and underlines and highlighters and sticky notes in it.
I went through 2 highlighters in The Revolution Will Be Bloody. So.
I'm the same way. I'm such a highlighter.
Like, I got to remember this. Well, thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. This was amazing. I love this conversation and I love your book and I cannot wait to get the next one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Are you excited about aligning to your cycle? If so, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and like the episode if it really resonated with you. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.